So I'm going to need to make some tent stakes in order to get my shelter going. So I've got a hardwood stake, kind of I guess a blank for a stake because I haven't made the stake yet. It's probably, I'd say 12 to 14 inches long. And I'm just going to make a few stakes with that. For my stakes, what I like to do is the wider end up here, I'll kind of round those and crown that off just by going around using a thumb assist. Trimming that right off. Just kind of clean it up. And then I'll come down about the width of my knife, maybe a little farther. And I'll actually put a stop cut in there. And you can do this with a saw as well. And then I'll carve down towards that stop cut at an angle. And that just gives a simple groove for my cordage to actually sit in. And you can take this down as far as you want, but it doesn't have to be all that deep. It's just a place, a recess. But that's just a simple stake notch. And I actually don't like to, on my tent stakes, go too far on that, because the thinner this gets, the more likely this is to shear off whenever you're actually pounding into the ground. And one thing that I do know about the Ozarks is there's plenty of rocks, and I think instead of dirt, they have rocks, and a lot of it is chert. It's a really hard rock, and it's probably going to do a number on these tent stakes, so you may hear me yell and cuss a few times, but we'll edit that out. Fix it in post, right? Make it pop. So just a simple stake notch. I don't want to get too crazy. Now, one thing I will say is on your tent stakes, another thing that will kind of protect them, you know, crowning the top of it prevents it from mushrooming out. It really does. But another thing is, I want to try to match this angle up here. And I'll tell you why after I do that. So just try to match that angle and kind of offset that crown a little bit. So you can see now this angle up here matches this angle here. And the reason I do that is when I hit this with a mallet to drive it into the ground, especially in hard ground, all the force is going directly down there where there's still material, right? If I were to hit it off center and this was still here, then I take a chance of shearing this off, this face, basically from this angle all the way up, would shear right off, and I broke my tent stake. So, little tip when you're making your stakes, to go ahead and do that. That'll prevent it from mushrooming out. And you know, I could just use my knife and sharpen a point onto this, but you know, this is bushcraft, and I didn't carry it all the way out here to not use it. So I'll use my axe, and it's a good chance to be able to show you a few techniques with the axe. Anytime you're using an axe with a handle that's shorter than 19 inches or so, it's best to use it either kneeling or in a seated position. And I always use an anvil, because you got to think about with an axe, this is one of the most dangerous things that you could use in the woods, right? It's a weighted sharp edge, and you're putting a lot of momentum, a lot of force on that. So if you miss your material or slip off of your material, there's a good chance you're going to hit yourself. And the momentum and the weight of this sharp edge versus a knife is pretty substantial. So you take a really good chance of taking a really nasty cut when you're using an axe. So I like to use an anvil. And I like to think about the follow through. I don't want the follow through. I don't want the axe to be hitting back here. I like to work way forward on the anvil, so that if I miss, or every time I finish a cut, the axe is towards the front of the actual anvil. And that prevents it from going any farther than that, and it's nowhere near where I am. Another thing I would encourage you to do is angle your material so that you can bring your axe straight up and down, rather than the other way around. Don't have this straight up and down, and angle your axe into it, because if that breaks, you don't really have, you know, positive hits on that anvil. You can slip, the follow through is just not good. So always put your material in a position to where the angle you're trying to cut corresponds with your axe going straight up and down. And it doesn't have to be crazy sharp, but I do want it to get started in the ground rather easily. I fully expect that once it gets in the ground, the chert is going to chew it right up. But I want to give it a good chance to get started. You see, I'm just going straight up and down with the axe. It's always landing in the anvil well away from me. There's no possible way that it's going to go through this and hit me. So be safe with your axe. It's the most dangerous tool you can use in the woods. And now I'm just over carving because I wasn't finished talking. Now I am. Oh, also, speaking of slamming it into there, if you're not using it, put it back in the mask or the sheath carefully. You know, an unmasked or unsheathed axe is just as dangerous as the same thing with your knife. Anytime you're not using it, put it away. Keep people from stepping on it, keep it from, you know, don't lean it on something, don't just leave it stuck into the wood. You know, if you do leave it stuck into the wood, make sure there's no sharp edge exposed, but don't leave it there for a long period of time. You know, put it back in the sheath just like you would your knife. So I've got my beautiful tent stake, sharp point on one end, crowned on the other. This angle matches the angle of the stake notch. Nice little stop cut with an angled cut there to make the stake notch. Hardwood stake. We'll see how it does here in the Ozarks with all the rocks, but there's plenty more where this one came from.